Can you defend your religious belief as a Christian? And what would happen if your faith was rigorously scrutinized? Would you be able to withstand that type of criticism? These are some really tough questions for anyone to consider. And I would argue that we all should consider them if we're going to be serious about, bolstering our faith in any way, shape, form or capacity. And if you're interested in defending your faith, then you have officially entered the realm of apologetics. For those who don't know what apologetics is, it is simply reasoned arguments or writings in justification of something. So in this case, it is the justification of the Christian faith against things like charges of falsehood, inconsistency, or credibility. A little fun fact that may help you remember what apologetic means is that the word is derived from the Greek word apologia, which simply just means defense. You probably were able to put two and two together and figure out that, this is also where we get the word apology from as well. Typically, when we hear the word apology, we think of a type of regretful acknowledgement of some type of failure, but there is a second definition of the word apology, which is essentially the single use of the word apologetics. So if apologetics are reasoned arguments or writings in defense of something, again, this is in the plural tense, then an apology is a singular reasoned argument or writing in defense of something. Now, I'm going to give an example that might help drive this point home. I'm going to mention some different, arguments for the existence of God, but I don't want you to focus on the names per se, right? I don't want you to get lost in the example. I just want you to focus on the example that I'm trying to make to illuminate what I'm trying to say here. So we'll explain these different arguments in a separate video if you would like that. Okay, so I want you to think of the ontological argument for the existence of God as an apology, right? That is a singular argument for the existence of God. But once you start getting into not only the ontological argument, but also the teleological argument or the cosmological argument for the existence of God, then now you are engaging in apologetics, plural, because there are multiple apologies or arguments in play here. Does that make sense? Hopefully I didn't lose anybody there. I'm trying not to assume that this is common knowledge because I know it wasn't for me just a few years ago. So I'm trying to explain this in a way that a younger me from about 2-3 years ago would kind of understand that. All right, now, before I move on, I want to give some timestamps to those who may want to skip ahead in the video. Some of this information you may have already been privy to, or you may be returning to this video and just want to go to a particular portion of the video. If that is the case, I provided some timestamps in the description below. But for those just tuning in first, welcome to the video. Welcome to the channel. Here's going to be the outline of this video. So first, I want to talk about the history and purpose of apologetics. This section is going to talk about how apologetics has developed throughout church history and what we use it for today. Secondly, I want to talk about the classification of apologetics and why that's important. This is going to delve into what we call taxonomy. So you definitely want to stick around for that. I think that's going to be really helpful for those who are, just getting into apologetics. And then lastly, I want to help you decipher which method may be the best for you and provide some helpful resources to get you started on that journey, right? We want to get you out into the field as soon as possible. So forgive me in advance if this video runs a little bit on the longer side. My goal is not necessarily to make an exhaustive video by any means, but rather just provide a framework for understanding this field of study to someone, who may be new to the faith or, just is just new to apologetics as a whole. Also, look, if you find this video to be a helpful resource, please consider sharing this. You just never know who may be struggling with defending their faith and just need this type of guidance. I imagine this is especially helpful in, the time that we live in, where you could be challenged on multiple fronts. You could be challenged on YouTube, you could be challenged at school or at college. Maybe if you're a sports athlete, right, you could be challenged there. Heck, you could even be challenged in your home by your own family and friends, right? And if you're being challenged in any of these places, I would think that you would want to know how to respond to these challenges, because there's nothing worse than the feeling of being unprepared when your worldview is under assault. Look, I'm like Winston in John Wick 3, and this video is my secret vault, right? I got all the ammunition you need right here, Jonathan, right? Your Christian worldview is the Continental. Let's defend that, shall we? Right? For the both of us. All right. With all that being said, let's dig into the first section of this video. So, when examining the history of apologetics, we first have to start where the root word apologia originated from, that being Greece. So in Greece, apologia was a legal term. As we have already established at the beginning of this video, it literally means defense. You got to remember that. In the Greek judicial system, the prosecution delivered what we call the categoria, which is the accusation or the charge. And yes, this is where we get our English word category from. And the defendant replied to this categoria with an apologia, which is a defense. A good example of this is Socrates' Apologia, which was chronicled in Plato's Apology. Now, for those who may not know, the New Testament was not originally written in English or Latin or Spanish or whatever language that you have the New Testament in, but rather it was written in Koine Greek. This was the common language of the Eastern Mediterranean area from around the 4th century BC until the time of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, mid-6th century AD. The Greeks heavily influenced pretty much all of the Eastern Mediterranean surrounding areas, including and cultures that also included the New Testament authors like the Apostle Paul, who gave his apologia in his trial speech to Festus and Agrippa when he said, "I'm going to make my defense today against all of the accusations of the Jews," right? In Acts chapter 26, verse 2. You should really go check out that passage, by the way. It's really awesome. While writing to the exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, I'm forgetting one more, Bithynia, the Apostle Peter gives some much needed encouragement to the Jews or the churches around that time in 1 Peter chapter 3, when they are faced with all types of persecution. And in verses 14 to 16 in that very same chapter, he said this: "But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame." So, as you can see, as Christians, we can trace the idea of apologetics all the way back to the apostles, both in action as seen with the Apostle Paul and in word as we see with the Apostle Peter. We can also track how apologetics has started to evolve throughout church history. You can see it in the writings of Justin Martyr in his books, the first and second apologies, where he's essentially writing to the Roman emperors at a time with the hope of persuading them to just stop persecuting Christians for the fact that they're trying to be Christian, right? For being Christians. You can also see it in the writings of Irenaeus in his book Against Heresies, where he gives a defense of Christianity against the charges and false teaching of the Gnostics. That's a very interesting book. You got to go check that one out. Let me think. I think you can also see it in the writings of Tertullian in his book against Marcion, where he gives a defense, against the heretical teaching of Marcionism, which, that is still alive and well as well. It's basically the view that the God of the Old Testament is bad and we should kind of do everything in our power to like do away with the God of the Old Testament, right? And we should only focus on the God of the New Testament. That's a whole thing in and of itself. I actually need to make a video on that because that's really interesting. Now, the list can go on and on, but I'm just going to leave it there for the time being. These giants of the faith laid the groundwork for how we are to engage in the task of apologetics, and I'm glad to say that we've built on that, since its conception, right? As we continue to glean from church history, right, we can understand that the purpose of apologetics is we can understand the purpose of apologetics a lot better, right, since its conception. The first purpose of apologetics is to bolster the faith of the Christian believers. This is reflected in Peter's instructions that we, just read in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 14 through 16. The second purpose of apologetics is to aid in the task of evangelism. This is reflected in Paul's defense of himself and just in Paul's ministry, in general, right? As he frequently went about everywhere that he touched base, proclaiming the gospel, giving positive reasons for why we should believe in Jesus Christ, right? Now, to accomplish these purposes, Christian apologists did so in two distinct ways, or they do so in two distinct ways, either by positive apologetics or negative apologetics. Now, I'm going to slowly kind of briefly explain the differences between the two. They're actually very simple, but for those who don't know or new to it, what's the difference between the two, I'm going to explain it real quick. So positive apologetics is when an apologist gives positive reasons for holding to the Christian faith, like the Apostle Paul did in his ministry. All throughout his ministry, he went about to the synagogue, preaching to the Jews, preaching to the Gentiles, giving positive reasons for why they should be Christians, right? This is kind of the thing that you want to think about. Now, negative apologetics, on the other hand, is when apologists give responses to opposition to the Christian faith. You can think of this as, Justin Martyr, when he was responding to the opposition of the Roman emperors as they started to persecute Christians, right? You can also think of this when you are defending your beliefs against, the charges of an atheist or a Muslim or, something along those lines. All right, so now that we understand the history of apologetics, and remember, this is not meant to be exhaustive breakdown, but more so just a general overview. Let's move on now to the next section of this video, which is understanding the different classifications of apologetics. Now, this is where I probably need to really start to slow it down, because I know you can get lost in the weeds. So don't click off the video yet. We're getting there. So this section alone can actually be broken up into multiple videos, and if you would like me to do that, please let me know in the comment section below. But for the sake of this video, I won't do that to you. Instead, we're just going to learn about the basics, right? Just get a little groundwork, right? I'm going to massage you into it. So in Christian apologetics, there are a multitude of methods that can be used to go about defending the Christian faith. Now, some of these methods can start to overlap each other, right? But each of them is still its own distinct method. And you have to remember that, right? They can overlap, but they're still their own distinct methods. From what I've been able to gather, though, in my research, there are a total of 28 different apologetical methods in Christian apologetics, right? That's a lot. I know what you're thinking. That is such a large number, but I just think it speaks to how much Christians have just thought about their faith, right? I'm so encouraged by that. The fact that the Christian faith can be defended in 28 different ways just should just instill so much confidence in the reliability in it, right? And it should instill in so much confidence in the Christian who's looking to delve into apologetics, right? 28 different ways. That's crazy. Now, the crazy thing is that I was only able to, see 28 different methods, but from what my understanding is, there could be more, right? Which is just wild to think about. Now, even though there are many different apologetical methods, that does not mean that you need to know about all of them to get started with apologetics, right? This is actually the reason why I started by going through the history of apologetics first. It was to show you that, you don't need to know all 28 to get started. You just need to have a passion to evangelize and to defend your faith. That's it, right? Just a martyr, Tertullian, Irenaeus, the Apostle Paul, the Apostle Peter, they couldn't tell you all 28 different apologetical methods, right? All they knew how to do was defend their faith, and they did so during their time, right? Their battles were a lot different than ours, right? So the type of apologetical method that we use today may look a little bit different than it was in the first and second centuries of the church history. So that's always important to keep that in mind as we delve more into the different classification of apologetics, because that's really important. Now, when you begin the task of classifying the various apologetic methods, you are engaging in what we know is as taxonomy, which is just the science or technique of classification. In the context of Christian apologetics, numerous brilliant minds smarter than myself had devised different ways to categorize apologetic methods, aiding us in determining the most suitable method for a given situation. And again, this is really going to be helpful because when you're looking to do apologetics, you're going to find different methods are better for certain situations, right? So that's why it's really helpful to know the different classifications of it. So, for example, Bernard Ramm presents a categorization of different apologetic methods in a three-structured view. The first category emphasizes the unique Christian experience of grace. The second category focuses on natural theology as a starting point for apologetics. Finally, the third category emphasizes revelation as the foundation of apologetics. And another popular, if you're not as much as a fan of his three-structured view, there is another popular taxonomy for categorizing different apologetic methods, and that's provided by Gordon Lewis, who classifies the different apologetic methods according to their respective religious epistemologies. Now, for those who don't know what epistemology is, because again, I don't want to assume that everybody just knows that. It is simply a branch of philosophy that investigates the origin, nature, methods, and limits of human knowledge, right? So when we speak of religious epistemology, we are concerned with how do we know what we know from a religious perspective. If you were to defend your religious beliefs, what is the source that you can point to from which you have derived that knowledge that you're arguing from? So in this taxonomy, Lewis takes a much more narrow view than Bernard does. He classifies the various apologetic methods into 6 categories. The first one is pure empiricism. The next one is rational empiricism. Then you have rationalism, biblical authoritarianism, mysticism, and then the last one is verificationism. Now, I'm not going to give you the definitions for each of the terms that I just listed there. That is something you're probably going to have to look up at a later time. I'm so sorry, but the video would run forever if I honestly did that. Remember, I'm just providing us with a very general, overview, right? Now, if you think that Bernard Ramm's taxonomical taxonomical view is too broad, as some people claim, and if you think Gordon Lewis's view is too narrow, then how about this? You can try and come up with your own system of categorization, since you have so much to say. I mean, really, no, I'm just kidding, right? I need to stop playing. But on a serious note, if you find yourself agreeing with the critics of Bernard Ramm and Gordon Lewis, then there's always another taxonomical view presented by Stephen Cohen and Stanley Gundry, where they classify the different methods by their argumentative strategy. They believe that most, if not all, apologetic methods can fall under 5 categories: the classical method, the evidential method, the cumulative case method, the presuppositional method, and the reform epistemological method. Now, there may be more Christian apologetic taxonomies out there that I'm not aware of, but I believe this should suffice for the sake of this video. Which taxonomy you choose to subscribe to is important, because it helps you understand Christian apologetics just much better, and it helps you understand the current dialogue surrounding this topic, especially when you consider the fact that there are some people who can get very passionate about this stuff, right? Because again, not every situation or not every apologetic method is appropriate for every situation, right? How you argue and defend the faith in one situation is going to look different than how you would in a different situation. But while this topic is important, what's more important is just using one of the methods to just get out into the mission field and just evangelize, right? You'll get better over time. And that's something you always have to realize. There's nothing better than experience. Now, how rough you start out depends on, how much you prepare. So that's another thing you got to keep in mind, right? You don't want to just go out there. Okay, Janai said, what's best is just getting that experience. We kind of have this mentality whenever we're raising our kids where it's like, oh, life would just teach them. And it's like, you could have taught them too. And they would have made a lot lesser mistakes. Now, you could have taught them and they still make those mistakes, but why not just teach them? Anyway, I'm kind of like going on a tangent. So this brings me to the last section of the video, where I can help you discern which apologetic method is the best for you. And to do that, I'm going to operate from Stephen Cohen and Stanley Gundry's taxonomical view, not because I think it's the right one per se, but because it's just the one that I prefer, right? And if you prefer Bernard Ramm's or Gordon Lewis's taxonomical view, then that's up to you. That's cool, right? I just find this the Stanley Gundry's and Stephen Cohen's view to just be a happy medium between Ramm's and Lewis's views. It's not too broad, but it's not too narrow either. Now, when it comes to helping you choose which method to start learning first, I would say that depends on your personal preference, what you value most, and or what context you find yourself in, right? This is something I've been kind of hammering home in this whole video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of scenarios, or more than a couple of scenarios, that may help explain what I mean here. Okay, here's the first scenario. Let's say you're talking with an atheist and they could care less about what the Bible says. They just want to prove how God exists, or they just want you to prove how God exists. So if I'm in that situation, I would probably go with the classical method of apologetics here, which argues from, atheism or agnosticism to theism, and then to, Christianity, more specifically down the road. Now, let's say if an atheist or agnostic is open to what the Bible has to say, or if you're just talking to someone who's spiritual but not Christian, then I would actually use the evidential method, because now miracles are on the table. And the goal of the evidential method is just to find evidences that clearly point to God, or that can be argued to point, to God. And then once you can do that, then you can try to argue your way to the Christian faith, much like the same way in the in the classical method. Now, let's say you're talking with a Muslim or a Buddhist or an atheist who may be on the verge of, or an atheist who may be on the verge of being religious, but they just don't know which religion to choose, right? So that's for the atheist, but let's say the Muslim or the Buddhist or the Hinduist, they're like, why exactly should we choose Christianity over being Muslim or being Hinduist or Buddhist? Or for the atheist, why should I choose your religion over everybody else's? Then that's when I would use the cumulative case method, which takes a more legal approach in that it tries to accumulate the best case for why Christianity is true, or at least why Christianity is more probable than all the other religions, right? Something along those lines. Now, switching up to another scenario. Let's say you are talking to that atheist again, but this time you're not too confident that they're honestly looking for the truth, but rather they're just trying to discredit religion altogether for the sake of promoting some enlightened way of thinking about reality or something along those lines. Then this is when I would use the presuppositional apologetics. Since the atheist is operating from his set of presuppositions about the world, being that he believes that, what determines morality is human flourishing or something, they have their own set of viewpoints about the world, right? Well, it's only fair that we can do so as well, right? We can use our own Christian presuppositional, views, and then we'll just do a battle of presuppositions, right? We'll see which presuppositional worldview explains reality better. Atheism or theism, or Christianity or Muslim or Islam, or Christianity or Buddhism. So you can not only do this with atheists, you can also do this with other religions as well. It's actually very fun. If you never did it before, that's honestly something you should probably practice with your other Christian friends. Who knows a little bit more about the faith, because I guess you do need to know someone who's not going to caricature the other side, because that's not what you want to do. You don't want to get practice with someone who barely understands Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism, things of that nature. Lastly, let's say you're talking to a rationalist or an empiricist, and their modes of thinking are hindering them from taking that leap of faith, so to speak, to believe in the concept of the divine, right? If you're in that case, then I would use the reform epistemological method, which essentially denies the belief that you need to know all of the evidence for God to know that God is real. In this method, the goal is to awaken in the unbeliever the sense of the divine, right? We see this in the more primitive countries that are not as developed as, other countries are. And yet they still find a way to, conjure up a belief in God. It may not be the Christian God, but they still believe in a God, right? I think that's very interesting, right? They're so far away. You think about the Old Testament, some of those nations believed in a God and they didn't have the scriptures. They didn't have the Torah, yet they still believed in something divine. Why is that? This method explores the why behind that fact. So that's my kind of guide to understanding the basics of Christianity apologetics, or Christian apologetics, not Christianity. As I said, this was not intended to be a comprehensive breakdown, but rather just a general overview to truly break, this topic. To truly break this topic down, you would honestly need hours on hours of video content, which I'm happy to make. You just gotta let me know if that's something that interests you. But I do want to keep developing this further as we kind of go along. Also, I'm going to list some books in the description below that may be very helpful for someone who wants to study this topic a little bit more. Maybe you have a preferred apologetic method that that interests you as you kind of watch this video, right? I want to provide some books that can help you get started, whether or not you want to use the classical method, the evidential method, the reformed epistemological method, so on and so forth, right? I want to list some books that can help you get you started. So I'll try and do my best to help you out in that aspect. But anyways, that's the video, guys. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you want to see more videos like this? Was it helpful? Was it not helpful? I actually want to hear your feedback. It definitely helps out a lot. Also, you know what to do. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You know it helps the channel out a lot. It helps that algorithm realize that, you know what, this is content that needs to be disseminated through the channels of YouTube, right? So help me do that, right? I'm trying to get to 300 subscribers. Y'all already know what the goal is. So let's do that. We still got enough time before the end of the year, right? But until next time, guys, peace.